Picture the desert at night. The air has cooled, releasing the day's heat back into a sky painted with more stars than darkness. Silence reigns here, not the silence of emptiness, but the quiet hum of ancient memory. The sand shifts gently, grain by grain, revealing edges of stone that do not belong to nature. These are pyramids, not the towering giants of Giza, known to every traveler and dreamer. These are smaller, steeper, their sides climbing toward the heavens at angles that defy the eye. They stand in clusters, like sentinels guarding secrets no pharaoh ever claimed. Their surfaces catch the moonlight and hold it, glowing faintly against the Nubian night. This is Sudan, northern Sudan, a place where most maps grow vague and tourists seldom wander. Yet beneath this quiet sky lies a kingdom older than Rome, richer than legend, and nearly erased from the stories we tell ourselves about the ancient world. The kingdom of Kush. The wind whispers through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of acacia and dust. Somewhere in the darkness, the Nile flows, patient, eternal, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. It has seen this story before. It will see it again. But tonight, beneath the Nubian moon, the stones begin to speak. Their voices are soft, like sand falling through an hourglass, but they are persistent. They tell of kings who wore the double crown of Egypt, of queens who fought Rome to a standstill, of furnaces that burned so hot they turned the desert night into day, of a script no scholar has yet decoded, of gods who walked between two worlds. They tell of Kush, a kingdom forgotten by textbooks, buried by time, and yet still present, waiting beneath the sand for those willing to listen. The desert does not forget. It only sleeps. And in the coolness of this night, as the stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance, the story begins to wake. The Nile does not begin as one river. It begins as two. Far to the south, where the mountains of East Africa pierce the clouds, the blue Nile tumbles down in torrents, wild, unpredictable, carrying the rich silt of Ethiopian highlands. From the heart of the continent, slower and older, the white Nile flows northward through swamps and reeds, patient as a grandmother telling stories. Near the modern city of Khartoum, they meet. The confluence is visible, even from space, two rivers of different colors braiding themselves into one. Here, where waters marry, civilizations were born. The ancient people who lived along these banks understood something profound. The river was not merely water. It was life itself, flowing in liquid form. When the floods came each year, they did not curse the deluge. They celebrated it. The Nile's rhythm became their calendar, their religion, their very heartbeat. This land, stretching from the first cataract at Aswan southward into what is now Sudan, was called many names. The Egyptians called it Tasseti, land of the bow, for the Nubians were archers without equal. Later, Greeks would call it Nubia, perhaps from nub, meaning gold. For gold there was, glittering in the hills, waiting to be coaxed from stone. But the land itself was the greater treasure. Between the cataracts, those rocky rapids that broke the Nile's smooth flow, valleys opened like cupped hands. In these valleys, grasses grew thick after the floods. Cattle grazed. Date palms clustered near the water. Clay, perfect for pottery, lay waiting in the banks. And from south to north, from north to south, trade flowed as naturally as the river itself. Ivory from the interior. Ebony wood, dark and hard as iron. Leopard skins for priests and kings. Incense from distant Arabia. Copper from mines older than memory. And always, always gold. Geography is destiny, historians say. And here, at the junction of two rivers, between Egypt's might and Africa's endless interior, destiny was being shaped like clay on a potter's wheel, slowly, patiently, with hands the sands of time would try to forget. Long before the first pyramid rose at Saqqara, before hieroglyphs adorned temple walls, before any pharaoh wore the double crown, people lived here. They were not primitive. They were patient. Archaeologists sifting through layers of sediment along the Nile's banks have found evidence of settlements dating back 12,000 years, to a time when the Sahara was not a desert, but a savanna dotted with lakes and teeming with life. The people who lived then were hunters and gatherers, yes, but they were also observers of the sky, trackers of seasons, tellers of stories around fires that have long since turned to ash. By 5000 BCE, as Egypt's pre-dynastic villages were just beginning to experiment with agriculture, the Nubians had already developed distinctive pottery, some of the finest in the ancient world. Their ceramics were thin-walled, elegantly shaped, decorated with geometric patterns that suggest not mere utility but artistry, even joy. Picture a village along the riverbank. Mud brick homes with thatched roofs. Children playing near the water's edge, while women shape clay vessels with practiced hands. Men return from the hills with hunted game, or from the river with fish caught in woven traps. Cattle, the measure of wealth, graze nearby, their bells clinking softly in the afternoon heat. This was the A-group culture, as scholars would later name it. They traded with early Egypt, their goods traveling north, while Egyptian grain and tools flowed south. The relationship was one of equals or near equals, a balance that would not last. By 3000 BCE, as Egypt unified under its first dynasties, the A-group vanished from the archaeological record. Did they migrate? Were they absorbed? Conquered? The stones do not say. There is a gap in the story, a silence that lasts centuries. But cultures, like rivers, do not truly disappear. They go underground, flowing through hidden channels, waiting for the moment to resurface. And when they did resurface, it would be as something grander, something that would rival Egypt itself, and for a time, surpass it. The seeds of Kush were being planted in soil soaked with the Nile's blessing, nurtured by the rhythm of flood and harvest, sun and star. Around 2500 BCE, a name appears in the whispers of the desert wind. Kerma, not a pharaoh's capital, but something else, a city rising in Upper Nubia, near the third cataract, where the Nile bends like a bow. Here, the first true kingdom of Kush took form, and its power was no longer a shadow of Egypt's, but a rival flame. The archaeologists who first excavated Kerma in the early 20th century found something astonishing. Massive mud brick structures, called defufas, rising like artificial mountains from the plain. The western defufa still stands today, its walls thick as fortress ramparts, its original purpose lost to time. Was it a temple? A palace? A granary? Perhaps all three, or something for which we no longer have a word. But it was the tombs that truly stunned. Beneath great earthen mounds, the kings of Kerma were laid to rest in chambers lined with treasures. Not alone, never alone. Hundreds of human sacrifices accompanied them, servants, soldiers, wives. Their bodies arranged in rows, as if frozen in the act of serving their Lord into eternity. The practice was brutal, yes, but it spoke of a society organized, hierarchical, and utterly certain of the afterlife's reality. Gold gleamed in the darkness. Faience beads, brilliant blue and green, spilled across skeletal hands. Bronze daggers, their edges still sharp. Pottery of such delicate craftsmanship that even Egypt's finest potters would have paused in admiration. Kerma's kings did not write their names in stone. They left no boastful inscriptions proclaiming victories. But their silence is eloquent. The quality of their goods, the scale of their monuments, the reach of their trade networks from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa, all speak of power. And Egypt noticed. In the texts of Middle Kingdom pharaohs, Kush begins to appear as a threat. Military campaigns are launched southward. Fortresses are built at the Second Cataract. Massive stone structures designed not to explore, but to contain, to control, to dominate. Yet Kerma endured. For 5 centuries, it stood as a beacon of Nubian power, a city where gold flowed like water, and the dead were honored with magnificence that rivaled the Valley of the Kings. But all kingdoms cast shadows, and in the north, Egypt's shadow was growing long. Imagine standing at Kerma's edge, looking north toward Egypt, then south toward the African interior. This is a threshold, a doorway, a place where worlds meet. Kush was never merely a kingdom. It was a bridge. To the north lay Egypt, ancient, proud, obsessed with order and eternity. Its gods had animal heads and cosmic responsibilities. Its kings built pyramids to touch the sky. Its priests wrote in sacred symbols that turned language into art. To the south lay Africa's vastness, a continent of kingdoms that history would too often ignore. From the lands beyond the cataracts came goods and ideas. Ivory that held the shape of elephant memory, leopard skins that chiefs wore as symbols of power, exotic woods that smelled of forests no Egyptian had ever seen. Kush received both, and in receiving, transformed. The Kushites adopted Egyptian gods, but did not merely copy them. Amun, the king of gods in Thebes, became something different in Nubia, more accessible, more present, a deity who walked among the people rather than reigning from distant temples. The Kushites built their own temples to him, but with African flourishes. Open courtyards where sunlight could dance, rams carved with exaggerated horns, a style that was neither wholly Egyptian nor purely Nubian, but something new. Trade goods passed through Kushite hands, but so did ideas, religious concepts, artistic techniques, perhaps even languages, though most of those whispers are now silent. Gold from Nubian mines flowed north, enriching Egyptian temples and royal treasuries. In return, Egyptian craftsmanship, the knowledge of bronze working, of monumental architecture, of embalming techniques, flowed south. But influence is never one-directional. Egypt shaped Kush, yes, but Kush also shaped Egypt in ways Egyptologists are only now beginning to acknowledge. Nubian mercenaries served in pharaonic armies. Nubian princesses married into royal Egyptian houses. And always, there was the gold, the foundation of Egypt's wealth, pulled from Kushite earth. Standing between two worlds means belonging fully to neither. It means being a translator, a merchant, a diplomat. It means being powerful precisely because others need what flows through your hands. The 16th century BCE dawned with fire. Thutmose I, pharaoh of Egypt's 18th dynasty, came south with an army hardened by campaigns in Asia. His goal was simple: conquest. The troublesome kingdom of Kush, that thorn in Egypt's southern border, would be crushed once and for all. Egyptian records, carved in triumphant hieroglyphs, describe the campaign with brutal clarity. The pharaoh's forces swept through Nubia like a flood of bronze and fury. Fortresses fell, villages burned. The great city of Kerma, that jewel of Nubian civilization, was put to the torch. Imagine the scene. Flames consuming the western Defufe's wooden roof beams. Smoke billowing black against the desert sky. The treasures of kings looted or buried under ash. The population scattered, killed, or enslaved. Thutmose allegedly hung the body of Kerma's defeated king from the prow of his ship, a grisly trophy carried back to Thebes. For the next 4 centuries, Kush would exist under Egyptian occupation. Pharaonic power stretched south to the Fourth Cataract. Temples were built in the Egyptian style, covered with hieroglyphs praising Egyptian gods and kings. Egyptian administrators governed Nubian provinces. The very name Kush became synonymous with subjugation. But here is what the Egyptian inscriptions do not say. Beneath the surface, Nubian culture survived. In villages away from the Nile's main artery, people still spoke their own languages. They still made pottery in traditional styles, buried their dead with local customs, worshipped gods whose names never appeared in Egyptian temples. Like a river forced underground, the Kushite identity flowed through hidden channels, waiting. Egyptian power for all its might, was stretched thin. The new kingdom pharaohs were obsessed with Asia, with Hittites and Syrians, with trade routes to Lebanon and military campaigns in Canaan. Nubia became a backwater, a source of gold and soldiers, but not a priority. And in that neglect, in that looking away, space opened. Time passed. Generations came and went. The Egyptian governors in Nubia began to adopt local customs. They married Nubian women. Their children spoke with accents that would have sounded foreign in Memphis or Thebes. The river was rising again, and when it finally broke the surface, it would do so with unexpected force. For centuries, this was Kush's gift and burden, until the balance broke. Centuries later, in the shadows of the 8th century BCE, something remarkable occurred. Egypt, that ancient superpower, was fracturing. The new kingdom had collapsed into chaos. The nation split. Petty kings ruled in the delta, priests held power in Thebes, and the monuments built by Ramses and Thutmose crumbled into disrepair. Meanwhile, in Napata, a city far south, near the Fourth Cataract, a new power was rising. The rulers here called themselves kings of Kush. They traced their lineage back through the centuries of Egyptian occupation and beyond, to Kerma and the ancient Nubian kings. But they were also products of cultural fusion. They worshipped Amun as devoutly as any Theban priest. They wrote in hieroglyphs. They built pyramids over their tombs. And they believed, with unshakable certainty, that the god Amin had chosen them to restore order to Egypt itself. Around 747 BCE, a king named Pi, or Pianki, as he's sometimes called, received what he described as a divine command. Egypt was in chaos. The sacred temples were neglected. The proper rituals were not being performed. This was more than political instability. It was cosmic disorder. Pi marched north with an army of Kushite soldiers. Egyptian records, carved on a massive victory stela found at Gebel Barkal, describe what happened next in vivid detail. City after city submitted to his advance. The kings of the Delta came to pay homage. Even the sacred Apis bull in Memphis apparently recognized Pi's legitimacy. But what is striking about pious inscriptions is not the military conquest, it is the religious devotion. He stopped at temples to make offerings. He criticized Egyptian rulers for their impiety more than their politics. He portrayed himself not as a conqueror, but as a restorer, a righteous king bringing order back to a fallen nation. For nearly a century, Kushite pharaohs, the 25th dynasty, ruled both Nubia and Egypt. Their names would be inscribed alongside Egypt's greatest, Pi, Shabaka, Taharka, Tantamani. They were called the Black Pharaohs by some, though the term itself is problematic, implying they were somehow different from real pharaohs. But in their time, they were simply pharaohs, rulers who wore the double crown, who built temples at Karnak, who were recognized from Napata to the Mediterranean. The kingdom born in defeat had become an empire. Kush's moment had arrived. Of all the Kushite pharaohs, one name resonates across the centuries with particular power: Taharka. He came to the throne around 690 BCE, young and ambitious, inheriting an empire that stretched from the heart of Nubia to the shores of the Mediterranean. But Taharka was more than a military commander or political strategist. He was a dreamer, a builder, a man who believed that the world of gods and the world of men could be brought into perfect alignment. Picture him at Kawa, one of his favorite temple sites in Nubia. The morning sun rises over the Nile, turning the water to molten gold. Taharka stands in the temple courtyard, watching priests perform the daily rituals, the awakening of the god, the offerings of bread and beer and incense. The air is thick with frankincense. Chanting echoes off stone walls. He commissioned temples across both kingdoms, but his Nubian projects reveal something deeper than political propaganda. At Gebel Barkal, where a flat-topped mountain was believed to be the home of Amun. He expanded the great temple into a complex of stunning beauty. Columns rose like stone forests. Reliefs showed the king offering to the gods with arms raised in eternal devotion. Ancient texts describe a dream Taharqa had, a vision in which two serpents appeared, one on his right, one on his left, representing Upper and Lower Egypt. A priest interpreted this as divine confirmation of his right to rule both lands. Whether the dream actually occurred or was a political invention doesn't diminish its power as mythology. Taharqa's reign was, for a time, prosperous. Trade flourished. The arts bloomed. In Egypt's temples, renovation projects restored the glory of bygone ages. The Kushite pharaohs, contrary to later propaganda, were not destroyers of Egyptian civilization, but its preservers during a period of crisis. Yet beyond the horizon, a storm was gathering. In Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Empire, brutal, militaristic, seemingly unstoppable, was expanding westward. Their armies moved with iron weapons and siege engines that could break cities like clay pots. Taharqa tried diplomacy. He sent gifts and embassies. He offered alliances. But the Assyrians saw Egypt's wealth and wanted it, and in 671 BCE, they came. The dream was about to shatter against the hard reality of history's relentless turning. They came from the northeast like a plague of locusts, their armor glinting bronze and iron, their siege engines rolling on wheels that had crushed a dozen kingdoms. The Assyrians were unlike any enemy Kush or Egypt had faced. They were systematic in their brutality. They kept meticulous records of conquered cities, deported populations, and tribute extracted. They skinned enemy leaders alive and displayed the results as warnings. They turned warfare into an industrial process. In 671 BCE, Assyrian forces under King Esarhaddon invaded Egypt. Taharqa, despite his military prowess, could not hold the delta. The Assyrians had iron weapons in abundance. The Egyptians and Kushites still relied heavily on bronze. The technological gap was decisive. Taharqa retreated south, regrouped, and counterattacked, briefly retaking Memphis. But the Assyrians returned with reinforcements. In 666 BCE, they drove deep into Egypt, and Taharqa was forced to retreat to Napata. His nephew Tantamani would make one final attempt to reclaim Egypt, marching north and briefly holding Thebes. But by 663 BCE, even that last grip was broken. The Assyrians sacked Thebes, the ancient holy city, the throne of Amun, with such thoroughness that the event was remembered for centuries. The Greek poet Homer, writing generations later, spoke of 100-gated Thebes as a wonder of wealth and power, even in its ruin. The Kushite pharaohs retreated permanently to Nubia. The 25th dynasty's rule over Egypt was finished. The dream of uniting the two lands under Kushite sovereignty had lasted less than a century. But retreat is not the same as defeat. The Kushites did not vanish from history. They simply returned to their roots, to the land between the cataracts, to cities and temples that had been theirs long before they ever wore the double crown. And there, south of the horizon where Egyptian power could not easily reach, Kush would reinvent itself once more. A capital would shift. A new age would begin. The furnaces of Meroë were about to ignite. Sometimes retreat is not an ending, but a transformation. As Assyrian pressure made holding northern territories impossible, the Kushite kings looked south, past Napata, past the familiar temples, deeper into Africa, where the Nile's course wove through landscapes Egypt had never fully controlled. There, in a region with access to iron ore, good grazing lands, and trade routes stretching into the African interior, a city called Meroë began to rise. The shift of capital was gradual, not a sudden flight. By the 6th century BCE, Meroë had become the heart of Kushite power, and with this move came fundamental changes. Kush was no longer primarily oriented toward Egypt and the Mediterranean. It was turning toward Africa, toward the Red Sea, toward trade networks that connected it to Arabia, India, and places Egyptian scribes had never named. Most importantly, Meroë sat on iron. Iron technology had been transforming the ancient world for centuries, but in sub-Saharan Africa, it was still relatively new. The Kushites, either through contact with the Mediterranean world or through independent innovation, mastered ironworking on an impressive scale. Archaeological excavations at Meroë reveal something astonishing. Massive slag heaps, the waste product of iron smelting, piled high around the ancient city. Some estimates suggest that at its peak, Meroë's iron production rivaled that of anywhere else in the ancient world. British archaeologists in the 19th century, seeing these industrial remnants, dubbed Meroë the Birmingham of Africa, a comparison that, while Eurocentric, captures the scale of the operation. Iron plows made agriculture more efficient. Iron weapons and tools bred through trade networks. The furnaces burned day and night, their fires visible for miles across the desert, a constellation of human-made stars rivaling the heavens above. But Meroë was more than industry. It was art. It was learning. It was power expressed in stone and gold, and the written word, though that word would be written in a script uniquely Kushite, no longer merely borrowed from Egypt. The kingdom was evolving, growing into something distinct. Egyptian influence remained. Pyramids were still built. Gods still worshipped. But increasingly, Kush was becoming itself, undiluted by northern shadows. The heartbeat of Africa was growing stronger in Meroë's furnaces, and the world was beginning to take notice. Night falls over Meroë, and the city awakens with flame. Imagine the scene from a distance. The stars emerge in the desert sky, countless and bright, unmarred by any modern light. But below, competing with the heavens, fires bloom across the city. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of furnaces burning through the darkness. Their glow paints the underside of smoke plumes orange and red. The air shimmers with heat, carrying the smell of charcoal and molten metal. Walk closer. The sounds of the city rise to meet the senses. Hammers ringing against anvils, the roar of bellows pumping air into furnace cores. Voices calling in languages that blend Meroitic Nubian dialects and words from farther south that even linguists today cannot trace. In the market quarter, traders from distant lands set up temporary camps. An Ethiopian merchant displays frankincense and myrrh, their resins glowing amber in lamplight. An Arabian trader spreads fine textiles, cotton from India, silk from roots so eastern they exist only as rumor. Carved ivory, elephant tusks transformed by skilled hands into cones and figurines, stands stacked like cordwood. The palace complex rises at the city's heart, its walls decorated with reliefs showing kings and queens in full regalia. Unlike Egypt's formal, profile-facing art, some Meroitic reliefs show figures in three-quarter view, faces almost turning toward the viewer, a subtle difference that speaks of artistic independence. In the Temple of Amun, priests perform evening rituals. But here, Amun is not alone. The god Apedmak, the lion deity uniquely Kushite, shares the sacred space. Reliefs show him three-headed, fierce, protective. He is not borrowed from Egypt. He is homegrown, a god who emerged from the African consciousness and claimed his place among the divine hierarchy. Children play near the Nile's edge, their laughter carrying across the water. Women fill jars at the river, balancing them on their heads with practiced grace. A baby cries. A dog barks. Someone is singing, a melody unfamiliar but ancient, passed down through generations that reach back to times before cities existed. This is not the Egypt of the pharaohs, rigid and eternal. This is something more fluid, more alive, a civilization at the crossroads of continents, absorbing influences and radiating its own light into the surrounding darkness. The furnaces burn on through the night. The hammers ring. The river flows. And above it all, Stars wheel in their endless dance, indifferent and eternal, watching as human hands shape metal and destiny below dot. In most ancient civilizations, power flowed through male lineage, father to son, king to prince. But Kush was different. In Kush, queens ruled, not as consorts or regents awaiting a male heir's maturity, not as exceptions requiring justification, but as sovereign rulers in their own right, commanding armies, negotiating with foreign powers, and being buried beneath pyramids with the same honors as kings. The Kushites called them Kandaks, sometimes written as Candace, a title that may have meant queen mother or royal woman. But titles matter less than reality, and the reality was power. Amanirenas is perhaps the most famous. She came to power around 40 BCE, during a period when Rome had recently conquered Egypt and was looking south with imperial hunger. The Romans assumed Kush would submit like every other kingdom they'd encountered. They were wrong. Ancient historians describe Amanirenas as fierce, one-eyed. She'd lost an eye in battle, a fact recorded almost with admiration, and utterly fearless. When Roman forces tried to push south beyond Egypt's traditional borders, Amanirenas met them with Kushite warriors. In 24 BCE, her forces raided Roman-occupied southern Egypt, sacking the city of Aswan and carrying off statues, including a bronze head of Emperor Augustus. This head would be buried beneath the entrance to a temple in Meroë, where visitors would literally step on the Roman emperor's face as they entered, a calculated insult of magnificent audacity. Rome retaliated, marching south with legions. But in the desert heat, far from their supply lines, the Romans discovered that conquering Egypt and conquering Kush were different propositions. The Kushites knew the land, could move quickly, and refused to fight the set-piece battles Romans preferred. Eventually, diplomacy prevailed over bloodshed. A peace treaty was negotiated, and here's the stunning part. It was favorable to Kush. Rome waived tribute payments and essentially recognized Kush as an independent power. Few kingdoms could claim to have faced Rome and emerged with their sovereignty intact. Other Kandaks followed. Amanisha Keto, whose pyramid yielded treasures of stunning beauty when excavated or looted, depending on one's perspective, in the 19th century. Navud Mak, Malakiriabar, queens whose names sound like poetry and whose deeds are carved in stone. Their images show them as warriors, holding bows, trampling enemies, wearing the regalia of power without apology or qualification. In a world where women's power was usually exercised from shadows, the Kandaks ruled in brilliant sunlight. The year is 24 BCE. The Roman prefect of Egypt, Gaius Petronius, receives disturbing reports from the southern frontier. Kushite forces have crossed into Roman territory. The garrison at Aswan has been overwhelmed, and leading the invasion is no mere general, but a queen, Amanirenas herself, one-eyed and fearsome. Rome had conquered Gaul, Spain, North Africa, and Greece. Its legions were considered invincible. The idea of a barbarian kingdom, worse, one led by a woman, daring to attack Roman holdings was intolerable. Petronius marched south with approximately 10,000 men. The Romans were professional soldiers, well-trained, equipped with superior siege technology and iron discipline. Against them, the Kushites brought mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and a deep-rooted conviction that they were defending their homeland. Initial Roman victories came easily. They retook Aswan and pushed south into Nubia itself, eventually reaching Napata, the old Kushite capital. Petronius ordered the city's destruction. Temples burned, monuments toppled, a statement written in flame and rubble. But the war did not end there. The Kushites did not surrender. They retreated further south, regrouped, and continued resistance. The Romans found themselves in a hostile land where water was scarce, the heat murderous, and the enemy refused to mass for decisive battle. Supply lines stretched impossibly thin. Roman soldiers, accustomed to Mediterranean climates, suffered in the desert. Diseases spread. Ambushes picked off patrols. And always, there was the question, why were they fighting? Kush had little that Rome actually needed. Its gold mines were largely played out by this period. The cost of conquest was exceeding any potential benefit. Enter diplomacy. Kushite envoys, possibly including Amanirenas herself, though sources conflict, traveled to the Greek island of Samos, where Emperor Augustus was holding court. The negotiations that followed resulted in a treaty remarkable for its terms. Rome agreed to withdraw from Kushite territory. No tribute would be required from Kush. The border would be restored to its previous location. In essence, Rome blinked. It was one of the few instances where Rome negotiated from a position that was, if not weakness, at least pragmatic recognition of limits. And in Meroë, Amanirenas returned to a hero's welcome. The bronze head of Augustus would be buried beneath the temple threshold, a symbolic victory to complement the diplomatic one. The war with Rome proved something crucial. Kush was not Egypt. It would not bend the knee. And even Rome, at the height of its power, could not break it. They rise from the desert like teeth, dozens of pyramids, smaller and steeper than Egypt's, clustered in royal necropolises north and south of the ancient city. The pyramids of Meroë are not as famous as Giza's monuments, but in their own way, they are more haunting. They stand in relative isolation, far from tourist circuits, half buried in sand that the wind constantly rearranges. Some are intact, their capstones still pointing toward the sky. Others are partially collapsed, their cores exposed like anatomical diagrams. What's immediately striking is their angle. Egyptian pyramids rise at approximately 51 degrees. The Meroitic pyramids climb at 70 degrees or steeper, sharp, aggressive angles that create structures more like spires than the massive, brooding forms of Giza. They are smaller too. Where the Great Pyramid towers 146 meters high, the largest Meroitic pyramid reaches perhaps 30 meters. But what they lack in scale, they make up for in number and elegance. More pyramids were built in Kush than in all of Egypt, over 200 identified so far. Each pyramid marked the burial place of a king or queen. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, which placed burial chambers deep underground beneath the structure, Meroitic pyramids had small chapels built against their eastern faces. Here, offerings could be made to the deceased. Reliefs carved on chapel walls show the dead ruler receiving offerings, ascending to the afterlife, meeting the gods. Many pyramids still bore traces of gold leaf on their capstones when early archaeologists arrived. Imagine them in their prime, the desert sun striking gold peaks, the entire necropolis glittering like a crown laid across the earth. It must have been visible for miles, a declaration of immortality and power. But who exactly lies within these tombs? The names can be read in Meroitic script, but we cannot fully understand them. We know some were queens, Akendakes whose reigns shaped history. Others were kings whose deeds went unrecorded or were recorded in languages we cannot yet read. One particularly intriguing question haunts Egyptologists. Why did the pyramid tradition persist so strongly here, even as it had died out in Egypt itself? What did these structures mean to the Meroites? Were they purely Egyptian borrowings, or had they been reinterpreted, giving new meanings by a culture that was always adapting, always synthesizing? The pyramids keep their secrets well. They stand silent beneath the stars, their shadows lengthening as the sun sets, their stones warming through the day and cooling through the night, breathing in their slow geological way. Every civilization creates gods in its own image, or perhaps discovers gods that reflect its deepest truths. In Kush, the divine realm was neither purely Egyptian nor wholly African, but something shimmering between, a pantheon that walked the borders of two worlds. Amun remained supreme, the king of gods, the hidden one whose name meant power. But the Amun worshipped at Gebel Barkal was not quite the same deity revered at Karnak. The Kushite Amun was more accessible, more directly involved in human affairs. Kings consulted him through oracles before making decisions. Priests interpreted his will through signs and rituals. He was less cosmic abstraction and more living presence. Beside Amun stood deities that Egypt never claimed. Apedmak, the lion god, fierce and protective, shown sometimes with 3 heads or a serpent's body coiling beneath his leonine form. He represented war, yes, but also protection, fertility, the dangerous power that could either destroy or defend. Sebiumeker, another uniquely Kushite deity, appears in reliefs crowned and powerful, his exact nature still debated by scholars. Was he a creator god? A solar deity? The limited texts provide few answers, only tantalizing glimpses. The goddess Isis traveled south from Egypt, but transformed in the journey. In Meroë, she became intertwined with local mother goddesses, her iconography blending with Nubian artistic traditions. She was still the magical one, the throne mother, but her face sometimes carried features that were distinctly African rather than Mediterranean. Temple architecture itself reveals this blending. Egyptian pylons and columned halls appear, but with modifications. Open courtyards allowed sunlight to flood sacred spaces. Ram statues, animals sacred to Amun, were carved with exaggerated stylized horns. Relief styles shifted from Egypt's rigid profiles toward more naturalistic portrayals. One particularly fascinating element: Kushite temples often included offering tables carved with libation channels. These tables would be placed outside, where the public could participate in religious ceremonies, a democratization of worship that contrasted with Egypt's more exclusionary temple practices. The Kushites seem to have believed that the gods existed in layers, that Egyptian names and African spirits could coexist, that different peoples might call the same divine force by different names. This was not theological confusion, but sophisticated religious thinking, the recognition that truth might have many faces. As the centuries passed and Meroë grew increasingly distant from Egypt, culturally, these syncretic gods evolved further, becoming something unique to Kush, a pantheon that future archaeologists would struggle to fully understand precisely because it existed between categories scholars preferred to keep separate. About 30 kilometers northeast of Meroë, in a landscape where the desert begins its gradual transition towards seasonal grasslands, stands one of the most enigmatic structures in all of Kushite archaeology, the great enclosure of Meroë. It is not a single building, but a sprawling complex, a labyrinth of courtyards, corridors, ramps, and chambers that seem to serve no immediately obvious function. Unlike temples with clear sanctuaries or palaces with recognizable throne rooms, Meroë resists easy categorization. The walls are covered with reliefs of elephants. Not just 1 or 2 decorative images, but dozens. Elephants shown in profile, elephants being captured, elephants in procession. This is unusual. While elephants lived in the region during Kush's era, they rarely featured so prominently in other Kushite art. Some archaeologists have speculated that the complex was a training center for elephants, intended for warfare or ceremony. The broad ramps could have accommodated large animals. The numerous water installations, cisterns, and reservoirs would have been essential for keeping such creatures alive in a semi-arid environment. But other features complicate this theory. There are temples within the complex, decorated with images of gods and kings. There are rooms that might have been living quarters, libraries, or schools. The entire structure suggests multiple simultaneous functions. One particularly striking element, the so-called Lion Temple, a small sanctuary decorated with reliefs of Apedmek, the lion god, shown with 3 heads and warrior queens presenting offerings. The artwork is stunning, among the finest examples of Meroitic relief carving, suggesting this was a place of significant religious importance. What was Meroë? A royal retreat. A religious university? An elephant training facility? A seasonal pilgrimage site? Perhaps all of these or none, or something for which we no longer have concepts or words. The site was eventually abandoned, left to the desert and silence. When European explorers stumbled upon it in the 19th century, they found it almost perfectly preserved, empty, mysterious, waiting. It remains that way today, a question carved in stone, a reminder that much of Kush's story is still written in a language we cannot fully read. On stone stelae, on temple walls, on pottery shards, scattered across archaeological sites, a script appears, unique, undeciphered, beautiful, and utterly silent. This is Meroë, the written language developed by Kush around the 2nd century BCE. It was a revolutionary act, the creation of a writing system distinct from Egyptian hieroglyphs, an assertion of cultural independence written in ink and carved in stone. The script comes in two forms: hieroglyphic, used for monumental inscriptions, and cursive, used for everyday documents. Scholars can identify individual signs. They can even sound out names and words phonetically. But meaning, context, grammar, these remain largely mysterious. We know, for example, that certain combinations of signs likely represent royal names. We can trace genealogies through repetition of symbols. But what these kings and queens actually said, what their priests recorded, what philosophies or histories they preserved in writing, this is lost. It's a peculiar kind of silence. The texts exist. We can see them, touch them, even read them aloud phonetically. But they refuse to speak. It's as if we're listening to a language through a wall. We hear sound, rhythm, emphasis, but cannot extract meaning. Why can't we decipher it? Several reasons complicate the task. First, there's no Rosetta Stone for Meroë, no bilingual text that provides a translation key. Second, Meroë appears to be unrelated to known language families, making comparative linguistics difficult. Third, there simply aren't that many texts. A few thousand inscriptions total, many fragmentary. But the greatest challenge might be conceptual. Decipherment requires not just linguistic skill, but imaginative empathy, the ability to think within a completely different cultural framework. What if Meroë grammar works in ways unlike any modern language? What if the concepts it expresses don't translate neatly into our categories? Some scholars remain optimistic. Computer analysis, new archaeological discoveries, and fresh theoretical approaches might eventually unlock the code. Others are less hopeful, suggesting that without more data, Meroë may remain forever partially opaque. And so the inscriptions stand, carved into eternity, but silent to modern ears. They are monuments to a civilization's voice, a voice that spoke, that sang, that recorded its truths, and that now waits, patient as stone, for someone to remember how to listen. Around the 3rd century CE, something began to change. Not suddenly. History rarely moves in jerks, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, like a tide retreating over decades. The Nile's floods became less reliable. Seasons shifted. Rainfall patterns, never abundant in the region, grew even more sparse. The grasslands south of Meroë, which had supported cattle herding for millennia, began their slow transformation toward the desert they are today. This was not unique to Kush. Across North Africa and the Sahel, a long-term climate shift was underway. The African humid period, which had begun around 15,000 years ago, turning the Sahara into a habitable landscape of lakes and grasslands, was reaching its final stages. The desert was reclaiming its domain. For Meroë, the consequences were existential. The kingdom's prosperity had rested on a delicate balance: iron trade, Nile agriculture, and cattle herding in the inland regions. As climate shifted, each of these pillars weakened. Iron production requires vast amounts of charcoal, which requires trees. As vegetation grew scarcer, the fuel from Meroë's furnaces became harder to obtain. Archaeological evidence suggests that ironworking declined significantly after the 3rd century CE. Agriculture along the Nile's banks became more precarious. Without reliable floods, irrigation required more labor and planning. Crop yields dropped. Food security, never guaranteed in the best of times, became a constant concern. Cattle herding, the economic foundation for communities away from the river, faced mounting challenges. Pastures dried up. Wells went brackish or empty. Herders moved further south and west, following the retreating grasslands, taking their wealth and labor with them. Trade networks frayed. Routes across the desert became more dangerous as water sources dried up. The Red Sea trade, which had connected Meroë to Arabia and beyond, increasingly bypassed the Nile Valley in favor of more direct routes. It's tempting to see climate change as a simple explanation for Kush's decline, but history is rarely so straightforward. Climate stress creates vulnerability, but human factors determine outcomes. Political instability, shifting trade patterns, and emerging rival powers all played roles. Still, the whisper of the wind through Meroë's abandoned streets carries a truth. All civilizations are ultimately subject to forces beyond their control. The Nile that gave life could also withhold its blessing. The desert that had been held at bay for millennia was patient, eternal, and eventually victorious. In the early 4th century CE, a new power emerged on the Ethiopian plateau, the Kingdom of Aksum. It was ambitious, wealthy from Red Sea trade, and expanding its influence. Around 350 CE, Aksumite forces invaded Kush. An inscription from Aksumite King Ezana describes the campaign with matter-of-fact brutality. Cities destroyed, populations enslaved, the Kushite king hunted through the desert. We don't know exactly how Meroë fell. No dramatic last stand is recorded, no epic siege preserved in text. The city simply fades from the archaeological record sometime in the 4th century. The pyramids stopped being built. The temples stood empty. The furnaces went cold. What happened to the people? Some likely fled south and west, carrying their culture with them into regions that would later become medieval African kingdoms. Some were absorbed into Aksumite territory. Others perhaps remained, adapting to new rulers, their language and customs gradually fading as generations passed. The Aksumites themselves provide few details. Their inscriptions boast of victory, but don't explain what they found valuable enough to conquer. Kush, by this point, was a shadow of its former glory, wealthy in history but diminished in present power. Ironically, Aksum would adopt many Kushite traditions. They built steely, massive stone monuments similar to Kushite pylons. They used some Meroitic artistic motifs. And in the centuries to come, Ethiopia would remember its connection to the ancient Nubian kingdoms, weaving them into origin myths and royal genealogies. But Kush itself, as a political entity, was finished. The name that had resonated for nearly 3,000 years, from the days of Kerma through the age of the Black Pharaohs to the industrial might of Meroë, fell silent. The desert began reclaiming the cities. Sand drifted through palace courtyards. Pyramids stood unmaintained, their gold leaf peeling away, their stone cores slowly weathering. Temples became homes for jackals and nesting birds. The Nile continued its eternal flow, indifferent to the rise and fall of kingdoms along its banks. Yet the story doesn't quite end. Cultures, like rivers, go underground but don't vanish. And centuries later, in the medieval kingdoms of Nubia, Nobasha, Makuria, Alodia, echoes of Kushite civilization would resurface, transformed but recognizable like water from a deep well. Centuries pass in silence. The pyramids of Meroë stand forgotten, half buried by drifting sands. Nomadic tribes occasionally shelter in the ruins, building cooking fires against ancient walls, unaware that they sleep in the remains of palaces. The Nile floods and recedes, counting out time in seasonal rhythms unchanged since the world was young. In Europe, the Renaissance comes and goes. The age of exploration sends ships across oceans. The ancient world becomes an obsession for scholars who pore over Greek and Roman texts. Egypt captures imaginations. Napoleon brings savants on his campaign. The Rosetta Stone is decoded. Egyptology becomes a science. But Kush? Kush remains in the footnotes, a name mentioned briefly in biblical texts and classical sources. The Ethiopians south of Egypt, exotic and distant, their actual history unknown. Then, in the 19th century, European explorers begin pushing south up the Nile. They find things Egyptian archaeology hadn't prepared them for: pyramids in Sudan, temples with unfamiliar inscriptions, tombs filled with treasures and styles that blend Egyptian motifs with something else entirely. The first reactions are telling. Some European scholars insist these must be inferior copies of Egyptian monuments, provincial echoes of a greater civilization. The idea that black Africans could have created an independent civilization of such sophistication challenges prevailing racial theories. An Italian explorer, Giuseppe Forlini, reaches the pyramids of Meroë in 1834. In a quest for treasure, he demolishes the top of one pyramid and discovers a burial chamber filled with gold jewelry of exquisite craftsmanship. He sells the treasure in Europe, where many refuse to believe it's authentic. Surely such fine work couldn't come from Sudan. Gradually, grudgingly, the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. These are not Egyptian ruins, but something distinct. The inscriptions are in a different script. The artistic style, while related to Egypt's, has its own character. The history preserved here belongs to a people who were neighbors and rivals to Egypt, not mere subjects or copiers. Excavations begin in earnest. Archaeologists map sites, catalog artifacts, begin piecing together chronologies. Each dig unearths more questions. How extensive was Kush's iron production? What trade networks did they maintain? How should we interpret their religious practices? And that maddeningly silent script, will it ever speak? The desert yields its secrets slowly, reluctantly, grain by grain. But it yields. And with each discovery, the kingdom of Kush emerges from the shadows of history, demanding recognition, reclaiming its voice. But what if we've been reading the story backward? This is the realm of speculation, of late-night conversations between archaeologists who've spent too many hours staring at artifacts that refuse to fit standard narratives. What if Kush, or something before Kush, was older than we imagine? What if the civilization we've traced back to Kerma was itself the inheritor of something earlier, deeper, now almost entirely erased? Consider, the kingdom of Kush endured for nearly 3,000 years in various forms. That's longer than the entire span of Western civilization from ancient Greece to the present. During that time, how much knowledge was accumulated, refined, lost, and rediscovered? Some scholars point to the A-group culture, those pre-dynastic Nubians who traded with early Egypt on equal terms. But before the A-group? During the African humid period, when the Sahara was green and North Africa teemed with life? What settlements existed then, now buried under desert sand or submerged beneath lakes that no longer exist? There's a persistent mystery in Egyptian religion. The gods are said to have ruled Egypt before the pharaohs. These mythical divine kings appear in king lists with reigns lasting thousands of years. Obvious mythology. But myths often encode memories. What if these divine kings were distorted recollections of an earlier civilization, one that both Egypt and Kush dimly remembered? Astronomical alignments in some Nubian monuments suggest sophisticated understanding of celestial movements. The Kushites' rapid mastery of complex technologies, writing, monumental architecture, advanced metallurgy, might indicate they were adapting existing knowledge rather than inventing from scratch. This is speculation, certainly. The archaeological evidence for a pre-Kerma advanced civilization is minimal at best. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when dealing with regions that haven't been as thoroughly explored as Egypt, and where climate change has dramatically altered landscapes. Perhaps Kush remembered something Egypt had forgotten. Perhaps both cultures drew from a deeper well, a source that predated their split into separate kingdoms. Perhaps, beneath the pyramids still unexcavated, beneath sand dunes that have never been explored, lie layers of history we haven't yet reached. The desert keeps secrets well, and the Nile, flowing eternally, carries memories in its waters that no scribe ever recorded, that no inscription preserves. Memories dissolved and diffused, present but unreadable, like stars reflecting in ripples. The moon rises again over the pyramids. It's the same moon that lit the desert sky 3,000 years ago, when Kushite kings walked these streets and furnaces glowed like fallen stars. The same light falling on the same stones, though the stones are older now, weathered, waiting. A wind rises from the south, from the heart of Africa, and moves through the ruins. It whispers through temple doorways where priests once chanted, through palace windows where queens once gazed toward the Nile, through the empty eye sockets of stone lions that guard nothing and everything. If you stand here long enough, in the silence between wind gusts, you might hear something. Not voices, exactly. More like an echo of voices. The memory of sound preserved in stone, the way amber preserves insects. Perfect, eternal, and utterly still. The kingdom of Kush is gone. Its cities are ruins, its language unread, its people dispersed into the great river of history, their descendants scattered across continents, their names forgotten or transformed beyond recognition. But kingdoms don't truly die, they transform. They dissolve into the soil that nourishes later growths. The iron technology Kush mastered spread across Africa, enabling agricultural revolutions. The artistic traditions influenced medieval Nubian Christian art. The memory of Black Pharaohs ruling Egypt would inspire later generations, seeking proof of African greatness. And here, under the Nubian moon, the pyramids stand as witnesses. They are not as tall as Egypt's, not as famous, but they endure. Through colonial exploitation, through modern wars, through the relentless erosion of time, they endure. Perhaps that's the final lesson of Kush, endurance. The ability to be conquered, but not destroyed. To adopt foreign influences without losing essential identity. To fail, fall, and yet leave something behind that refuses complete erasure. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. The same stars Kushite astronomers charted. The same constellations that guided traders across the desert. The same cosmic order that temple alignments mirrored in stone and space. The desert night is neither hot nor cold now, but perfect. That brief window when Earth's heat has radiated back to the sky, but the morning chill hasn't yet descended. In this moment of balance, the ruins seem almost alive again, almost ready to speak, but they don't speak. They simply stand. And that standing, that refusal to disappear completely, is itself a kind of voice. The wind shifts, the moon climbs higher. Somewhere far away, the Nile continues its eternal journey toward the sea, carrying with it silt and memory, sustaining life along its banks as it has for millions of years. And in the morning, when the sun rises and tourists arrive with cameras, guides will tell stories about the kingdom of Kush, stories that are part history, part archaeology, part speculation, and part myth. But in the night, the stories don't need telling. They exist in the silence between stones, in the space between stars. No kingdom truly dies, the desert whispers. It merely sleeps and dreams. If you've stayed with this journey through sand and centuries, through the rise and fall of the Black Kingdom, perhaps you've found something worth remembering. The story of Kush is, in many ways, the story of all civilizations, brilliant and flawed, powerful and vulnerable, eternal in aspiration and temporary in reality. Until the next time the moon rises over these pyramids, and the stones remember what it means to be part of something that, however briefly, touched the infinite.